I think you can record.
All right.
Okay.
So I'm Kheng. I'm publisher of Landmark Books. I'm very, very happy to publish Daryl. And it's an anthology that I've never come across something like this before. And that's really one of the reasons why I published it, because there's no point publishing stuff that other people have written before or is like someone else. I checked this with Daryl before we started, and he said it's okay and it's quite an apt description. I describe his book as it's like dumpster diving. And you find wonderful treasures in a dumpster, some things that people don't want, but there are gems that many other people will like. And it's also, you can furnish a whole house dumpster diving. I had a friend in the US who did that. He furnished his whole house purely by dumpster diving. And that's like this book. It's it's someone else's life that you make your own, and it's another existence that you can make your own, and that it's a future life that will become our own. So I'm just not going to say more than that. I'm going to ask Desmond and Daryl to continue, and I'm going to get out of the spotlight.
Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Kheng.
And thank you again for believing in the book.
Yes, and it's a wonderful book.
Spotlight.
All right. So everybody, welcome to this space. I'm Desmond Kon, a very good friend of Daryl W.J. Lim. And I'm so honored to be able to have this conversation with him on his amazing new book. All right, so let me quickly just introduce Daryl. Daryl Lim Wei Jie is a poet, translator, editor, and literary critic from Singapore. His first book of poetry is a book of changes. It's over here, it's this one. It was published in 2016. And he is the co-editor of Food Republic, a Singapore literary banquet that just came out last year. That is the first definitive anthology of literary food writing from Singapore. His latest collection of poetry is Anything But Human that we're talking about today. His poems have won him the Golden Point Award in English Poetry in 2015, and that was awarded by the National Arts Council here in Singapore. Okay. So how we're going to do this is I'm going to have this huge conversation with Daryl because I've done like close readings of all his work and I've got lots of questions and there's no way I can get through all of them. Okay.
I'm nervous.
I'm going to put him on the spot. But in between, Daryl's going to read some poems. And at any point in time, if you've got a question, can you just put it on the chat? And if I see it, I'm just, we might just interject with some exciting question you come up with. And towards the end, we'll also have people ask questions in a free flow sort of Q&A. Okay, I think that's the best way to do this, right? All right, so Daryl, let's start with the first question, which is the title. It's a beautiful title, Anything But Human. Well, how did you settle on it? Was there a lot of thought that went into it?
Oh, I don't even know where to start. So some in the audience won't know because they were privy to the agony of my title search, and I tell you, it was such an excruciating process, and it went from title to title before I finally landed on Anything But Human. So just to give you a sense, for the longest time it was way out of kilter. So the concept being like something being out of kilter is sort of off center or off balance, right? Which you can see why that sort of fit the book. And then way out of kilter was kind of a double meaning because it was very out of kilter. So something is way out of kilter, but it's also a way out of the mess that we're in. So that was one title. But it didn't really convince me that much. So I struggled with it. Not everyone was convinced, but it was the title of the working manuscript for a long time, as my friends know. And then I tried something else, which was not as successful, called Beneath the Mower's Hand, which sounds like a strange, I'll type it in the chat, Beneath the Mower's Hand.
Mower?
And it sounds like a weird title, but actually if you know your hymnology, it comes from the hymn "O God, Our Help in Ages Past," and actually Oh God, Our Help in Ages Past supplies the title of a series of poems in the first section. So The Fly Forgotten as a Dream is from that hymn.
Okay.
And I think I chose that hymn because it was quite a strange hymn to me. And in some sense, although it was meant to be an optimistic call to God's people, it was also very debilitating and unoptimistic if you read the lines. So the line goes, that the souls of those who die are fly forgotten as a dream. So went all through that route, and then I think finally the title was actually in front of me because I had always wanted to quote this epigraph by the Chinese poet Wang Xiaoni, and the quote goes, let me read it from the book. So it's the first is the epigraph, and it says, 除了人，现在我什么都想冒充。Now I'd like to pass myself off as anything but human, and so that really landed as the title, and it seemed to click that. It seemed to click because when I put it down as the title, it made so much sense to me. It's like, okay, yeah, this is the title, and everyone that I spoke to was convinced that this was the title. So I mean, those people who had been supporting me in trying to put the book together, they were all convinced that this should be it, and that kind of told me that it should be the title, and it speaks to, I think, in some ways, as I told you on Facebook as well, that the book is so much about not the scientific end of the world, but in some ways the poetic and the aesthetic end of the world.
Okay.
So, and that sort of trying not to be human, trying to leave aside being human in the context that we're at, that's part of the concept. And as Felix said, I found out very recently after trying to search the hashtag anything but human, that anything but human is the name of a band. So yes.
Of a band?
Name of a rock band.
Oh, wow. There you go. So it's hip already. Your name is hip already. Right? Okay.
Yeah, I guess.
So, okay, years ago, you told me that you're excited about this new project that you're on. And you said that it was set around the idea of fake news. But this book, when I saw it, is quite different. And in our Facebook chat weeks ago, I'm quoting you here, you said it's closer now to a meditation on what the world ending means poetically. But fake news, you can say, is a symptom of the world ending. But perhaps the abiding theme of the book is now a sadness. That also Larry mentions in his blurb on your book. You know, he says that these are poems of aftermath and prototype. They are parables of how to survive a cataclysm we imagine has yet to come, but has actually already arrived. The poems are deeply funny, but they're also almost always deeply sad. So tell us about the evolution of this project, right? How it's become this shape and form. Yeah.
So you're completely right. So as Hao Guang types in the chat, actually, yeah, I even forgot about that. And maybe my friends here will actually recall some bits that I don't. That actually it started off in the first iteration, as you said, as something like Fake News Factory. And the idea was actually a reaction to this idea of falsity. And the idea was, I mean, people seized on fake news, and like having bots and factories that manufacture fake news was like a cool, like a very novel and horrifying concept. But actually my point was that we are all fake news factories. Like we all manufacture falsities to live by, right? Be it our social media profiles, the sort of convenient beliefs that we believe in. We are participants of the fake, and that's why we have allowed the fake to happen. So I was very seized with that idea for a long time, and I think it does recur in the book. But then I realized that the themes were actually much larger than that, and actually it was not just about that one thing, but that was one strand in a whole, I think, cataclysm that was happening around us. And so that's what the book really became after that. And it's weird because I wrote so much of it before COVID hit. And then when COVID hit, it seemed all of it was coming to life and to play. I mean, I'm not Nostradamus, but it was coming to life and it was happening in real time, poetically and aesthetically. I think that was my conviction when I saw what was happening in the news. Like everything that I thought, the worst excesses of humanity in some ways sort of played out. You know, fake news was even more fake. Like, you know,
Yeah.
So that's just to speak that point. So it's actually quite insane to have it been published during the pandemic, which is
Right.
still ongoing, and apparently there are new updates to the pandemic, new patches. So it seems like it will go on for a while more.
Yeah. So we have deep fakes where and we're going to talk about ideas of truth and narrative later, right? So you
Yeah.
mentioned Nostradamus, and and you've even got a poem titled The Prophet's Day out. I just want to get a
Yes.
sense of who the speaker and narrator of this poem is, right? What kind of prophetic voice, if so, does the speaker or narrator of the book have? Is it one voice? Is it you, the authorial presence, or is it several oracular voices, almost multiplicitous, just weighing on, the times, the milieu? How do you see the speaker of all these poems?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I wanted to pick up on that because actually, and this maybe is going to presage another question that you might ask about how the second book differs from the first book. But actually, and they are hugely different books, but there's one strand of continuity, and that comes from a poem in the first book called The Prophet. And the prophet is a figure that basically makes it to the second book. And there are actually 2 or 3 poems which talk about the prophet.
Okay.
So there's one prophet poem which is dedicated to Wong Pui Nam, and there's another. I think there are at least 2 or I think there are two prophet poems. And basically, the prophet is the entry point to the second collection, because the prophet, if the first collection is about seeing what the past is, so my first collection was a lot about Singapore's history, about the history of the world, national and global histories. The prophet is the entry point to the second book because it's about the prophet sees the future. And so the prophet is the figure who ties the 2 books together and leads us in. And it is the prophet's voice. I mean, that's the prophet is me in some ways. Like that's the voice that I'm speaking in. He's one of the voices, I would say. But he is the main unifying voice. If you would like to think of a voice that ties the things together, it is his voice. And his voice, I think you can read in his voice prophets of the past, like, biblical prophets, but also poetic prophets, like, T.S. Eliot, like Yeats, and in particular Wong Pui Nam. And you realize that one of the prophet poems is dedicated to Wong Pui Nam, because I think Wong Pui Nam, who is this Malaysian poet, continues in the vein of people who are trying to see into the future and see disaster, right, or like barrenness or ruins. So that is the prophetic sort of tradition, at least my sort of prophetic tradition. So that is one voice. But that is maybe I would say the voice of the first half. So just let the viewers here today know that the first half of the book is called actually what's the oh no, it is
Deserts
called
of the Real. Deserts of the Real.
The Desert of the Real. And then the second half is called The Great Reset. So Desert of the Real is the first half, and that really has that prophetic voice. The second voice is a bit more mixed. And I would say the second voice, I mean, very clearly, again, if you read the book, there are these translations of the Chinese poet Bai Zhi, who we can talk about a bit more later. So his voice comes through, and I think his voice is an important counter voice to this voice of ruin and destruction, because his voice is a voice of a new tradition, and I have reasons for saying that. But there's also a voice of a quieter voice that tries to seek wisdom and brevity after whatever has happened in the first half. And it's that voice that is trying to find its way out of what is happening right now. Yeah. So maybe there are 3 voices in the book.
Nice. And since we're on the second chapter, the second half, and I asked you this when we, the half hour before we started, there's this interesting architecture happening in the second half where you have narratives from 1 to 11, right? Something that does not appear in the first chapter. Can you tell us a bit aesthetically what you're trying to do in that chapter, Great Reset, with all these iterations of narratives?
Yeah. So the narrative poems are very short poems. I think they don't go beyond 6 or 8 lines, and they're super short. Maybe they're like 5 to 10 words per line, if even that. And I think, one, aesthetically, they are a contrast from the first half. So they're much shorter, they're much less dense. If the first half has more dense images, this tries to really strip it down to almost oracular sayings, to use that word again, but more in the sense of these are almost mysteries, right? Because if you think about the prophetic tradition, there's one tradition where it's about what's happening next in terms of the future, and that's sort of the visions of the future, terrible things, these very baroque and ornate visions of what will happen. There's also a tradition where it's very Gnostic, where it's kind of these there's this hidden knowledge that you get from these sayings. So I think of those as something like that, as kind of Gnostic sayings or brief Gnostic sayings, which make you think about things a little bit, but the aesthetic is completely different from the first half.
Nice. Actually, I think Allen Ginsberg's got a very interesting idea about the poet as prophet, which is quite different from the idea of actual prophecy. But I can't remember the exact words, so
you have to viewers
right?
have to look it up.
It's in the movie with James Franco. That's how I'm so kitsch. It's ridiculous. Okay, next question. To sum it up for anyone who hasn't read the book, what are the 3 most important aspects or themes or tropes to look for in this book to home in on? Tell us, give us the 10-year series answer to this.
Yes. The first one I'd say would be the cataclysm or the end of the world, but as I said, not in scientific terms. So it's not concerned with the ecology or like, you know, the climate science of it, or what's happening to the world in real like ecological terms. So it's not about like, you know, like what's happening to animals or humans, not so much that, but what's happening to our minds. I think that's what the book is about. What does the end of the world do to our minds and the poetry that we write? Okay, that's the fun. And it was very funny. I mean, just to go on a bit of a detour here. I don't know if you've ever watched Bo Burnham's Inside. Bo Burnham's Inside is basically, I think in some ways this book, but in musical form. Oh. So I think you can watch that. It's okay, it's not this book, but I mean, it echoes the spirit of this book. And when I listened to it for the first time, I was like, wow, yeah, this is weird. This is very, very weird. So please, if you, I think it's still on Netflix. Yeah, it's incredible. So that's one. The second one I would say, and it's related to this point, is about consumption. And it's about consumption. Of course, I'm a great foodie, as you can tell, because I edited the Food Republic book with Hao Guang, who's here, and Anne. And it is about consumption, but not just consumption of food, but consumption ultimately of everything, of media, of ourselves, of products. So there are a lot of poems which talk about this madness of consumption, and the madness of consumption sort of mirrors the impending knowledge, the knowledge of our impending like end. So I think that's the two big themes. The third theme I think is really about poetry itself, and that again links up to the first theme, and really what is the end, what is the next step poetically. Maybe not, I don't claim to speak for all poetry, but what is it for me? Like, I'm trying to contend with what is the future of poetry for me, and trying to find a way out of, in a way, a conundrum that I have got myself into. Because if I think that this is the aesthetic or poetic end of the world, then what is the way out? And so Bai Ji, as I said, plays a big role here, because in some ways he did show me the way out. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Nice. And so we've got Hao Guang weighing in, saying a lot of people quote Gramsci nowadays on the end of the world. Quote, the crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms. Actually,
it's a damn good quote.
Yeah, right? It is.
It's a very good quote. Well done, Hao Guang.
I know. Oh my goodness. Okay, this is a very intense, intelligent audience. There's Shelley Bryan, there's Daryl Lim, there's Amanda Chong.
What is the way out?
Hamid, all the way from, are you in Europe or New York now? I don't know. Hamid, where are you?
Hamid's in Austria, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so Daryl, thank you. So those are the three important points. Actually, Amanda Chong does bring up the idea of consumerism in her cover praise for your book. She says, anything but human takes our tendencies to consume, commoditize, and capitalize to their rightful absurdist end, right? And I think that a poem that speaks to this is your poem Junk Space Rhapsodies, which you have called your favorite poem in the book. So would you like to, now's the time to have you, to hear you read one of the poems, huh?
Can let's do that.
It's on page 30, people.
Yeah, if you have the books on page 30. It's called Junk Space Rhapsodies. Maybe I just give a bit of a one or two lines introduction before I read it. So Junk Space is actually this monograph by Rem Koolhaas. He invented this concept called junk space. So Rem Koolhaas is just like, I think he's Dutch architect and like urban theoretician, you know. And he actually wrote this very famous book on Singapore called Singapore Songlines. And that's a great work. I encourage you to read it. But also Junk Space is a great little monograph. And he talks about junk spaces, like, you know, how shopping centers or these new spaces that we create for the new millennium are junk spaces because they don't have any history or heritage. They constantly evolve. They don't make sense. They are in some ways disfigured and meaningless spaces. So Junk Space Rhapsodies is about this. It's about a shopping center. It's about a department store, really. Okay, so Junk Space Rhapsodies. We've lost count of the subsidiaries we have. Money, they say, is its own reward. Your girlfriend would appreciate a new succulent. We've recently reached new heights of customer feedback. Money, they say, it's its own reward. The manager grew up in the bakeware section. We've recently reached new heights of customer hatred. Would you like a snow globe of the Vietnam War? The manager grew up in the lingerie section. To pacify ourselves, we bought a new kettle. Would you like a snow globe of the Watergate scandal? The cleaner's smooth face obscures a history of violence. To pacify ourselves, we ate a new kettle. We're out of all sizes except impossibly tiny. The cleaner's smooth face obscures a history of love. If you close your eyes, it's like you're back in the Greek agora. We're out of all sizes except out of shape. You'll be surprised at how many things are now half price. If you close your eyes, it's like you're back in the Grand Bazaar. Over here, we do repackaging of gifts and mortgages. You'll be surprised at how many things are now free of charge. The air conditioning doubles as disinfectant. Over here, we do repackaging of gifts and mortgages. I'm sorry, I can't help you. Can't you see I've just quit? We've just found out how many subsidiaries we have. The air conditioning doubles up as reinfectant. Your girlfriend would appreciate a new agate Spock. I'm sorry, I can't help you. Can't you see I'm in charge? Okay, so that was Junk Space Rhapsodies.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Daryl, for the lovely read. Okay, and this, you know, you actually mentioned the final cause of the cup is capitalism. You're often your own superhero. Do you believe that? Do you think we are the saviors of our own, you know, plight?
I guess we have to be, right, which is why we bother to do things like this. We bother to write. We trying to find a way out. And in some ways redeem ourselves and find meaning for ourselves. Yeah.
So what does poetry do for you, Daryl? I mean, you are working in very serious work, which is helping the nation at a very high level, work that actually does change things and help people. And then as a poet, what do you think your agency is? I've asked the lawyers this all the time, and, you know, Gerald Yam gives me fantastic answers about that, and Amanda too. But what about you as a, you know, with your day job?
Oh, you're asking what is my day job? Is it
No.
How does it help?
The different kind of agency you have, and it's very important work that you do in your day job. And then as a poet, you know, what?
Are you just asking about the poetic side of it?
Both.
Like you're asking both. Okay. I answered the poet side first. I mean, this maybe strays away from the book itself, but I think maybe talks a little bit about why I continue to write, and what hope I see in writing. I've been, I think, really encouraged by the fact that and I think there's at least one mentee in in the Zoom call today, that whenever I have mentored mentees for the Creative Arts Program or CAP, I've always had an immensely rewarding experience. And I said a few days earlier that in many ways I could have become a teacher. I almost took up the teaching scholarship, and I would have gone on to teach history and English. And that gives me some glimpse into the life I could have had. But the mentoring does make me think that in teaching people how to view the world, to break out of the cliched and mundane ways of viewing the world, I can bring some sort of joy to their lives, and really, I think, help them see the world anew, and out of these stuck ways of being that we are in. So that's some of the hope, I think. And the poetry, I think, links to that, because the poetry is designed to, in some ways, do that, right? Is to liberate us from these cliched ways of seeing the world. You know, be it left or right, left and right, Democrat, Republican.
Yeah.
I think poetry provides a respite from that, and reshapes the world. Yeah.
Nice. Now Amanda has got a very important question in
What's
the
the way
chat.
out?
What is the way out, Daryl?
The way out
save the world.
largely is to one, get countries to reduce their carbon emissions. So that's mostly the way out. That's the realistic way out. In terms of poetry and reading, I think we need to. It builds on the point earlier that I think poetry and literature cannot be subject purely to ideology. I think that and identity, that they must help us break out of those squares, those boxes of thinking that have trapped us in. Because if poetry can't do that, then we are doomed. Yeah.
Nice. That's what the artist can still do, right? So in one of your poems,
Amanda has another. Do you want to pick? Okay, we can pick that.
Go for it. What, Amanda has another big thing.
She said, how is that way out related to Bai Chi? I think let's do that later. Maybe we'll talk about influences or something. Yeah.
Okay.
You do your question. Sorry.
Okay. No. Fine. No. Just since you're talking about the real world instead of the world of poetry, right? You know, in your poem, from here I can lick the clouds. You've got this line. I don't know where the updates are. Social justice. Okay?
Oh yes.
So why don't you talk about social justice? What are your views on it? What are your views?
That's a hilarious point to that line, because actually it used to be, what are the updates? Read the war on terror.
Yeah.
So so it was not the phrase social justice.
Yeah.
It was the phrase the war on terror. But one, I realized that I used that phrase somewhere else in the book, and two, I think it was less relevant to that poem. What are my views on social justice? I mean, it's a great thing. It's just not what my poetry is concerned with. That's as good as an answer as I can give.
Okay.
I think
That's fine. Okay. Now, since we are a bit on the topic of politics, I'm going to quickly just have another line from your poem New World Symphony. You say, I remember the generations without excess as in access to things. What do you think? Is that the sort of the world that we are in here, where we have access to everything, whether it's goods and services, whether it's information, probably too much information. What are you trying to say with I remember the generations without access?
Oh, actually, that's a great question. So I think what was the line actually? New World Symphony, right?
78, page 78.
I remember the generations without access, but there's the next line, right? To toilet paper.
Yeah, I only take out the important one to grab it. Why must he always make it so?
No, but I think that's important, because my point was that actually, yes, there were generations without access to toilet paper, and that thought haunts me, right? As it should haunt you, especially as you are pandemic panic buying uh, toilet paper.
Mhm.
And that is part of it. That the absurdity of the fact that we're still fundamentally the same animals, the same human beings were around like millions and millions of years ago.
Mm.
Our impulses haven't changed all that much
Mm.
when it comes to sex, greed, food, panic buying. We have dignified ourselves in all this gabla of, well, poetry, social media profiles, Instagram. But ultimately, at the heart of it, are these human impulses which are driving us to ruin, right? Consumption is definitely one, and in some ways, we're hardwired to do that because our addiction to more and more better things is part of it. Yeah. So that same drive to survive is also the same drive that drives us to excess.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, nice. Thank you for that. Very wise. All right, you did talk a bit about how your voice has changed, but I also mentioned to you that I want us to get a sense of how Daryl W.J. Lim has changed as a human being alongside his voice. How have you changed since your first book? I did mention in our Facebook chat that I want to get a sense of who the real W.J. Lim is versus Daryl as the lyric performance, Daryl as the literary critic versus Daryl as the professional, as a thinker. So who is the real guy behind all this campy lyric?
Oh, it's interesting that you describe the lyric as campy.
Mm.
Actually, can I ask you why?
Oh, because it's so you. I can't divorce you from it. But oh my goodness. Okay, I'm sorry. I love you. We're good friends. We get drunk on whiskey. Well, twice. So come, Daryl. Who are you? Who are you? It's like the big celebrity question I used to ask all like the big Madonnas and everything. So I'm asking you this now. What do you think?
Campy is interesting because I think I would have thought many people would have described me as campy, but I don't think it's wrong of the lyric because I mean, so let's do a poetic. Let me answer you poetically first, and then I'll answer you personally. Poetically, it's campy because kitsch is campy, right? And actually, kitsch is campy because kitsch as a style doesn't, or at least when you think about kitsch, it's because it doesn't have its own roots or background. It takes certain styles and it exaggerates it, or it's a hodgepodge of styles, right? That's kitsch. And that makes sense from the book now, because the book, as Kheng has been saying, is dumpster diving. It picks gleaming pieces from like all over the world and from social media and from things, and puts it into style, into my poetry. And I was just talking to Hao Kwang just now, and Hao Kwang can come in because actually he and I are quite similar in that respect. That we both do that, and there's literally a line from, I was just sharing with them, the long poem at the end.
Yeah. Age of Miracles.
No, Credo.
Oh, Credo. Oh, are you gonna read Credo after all?
I'm not gonna read the whole poem, but
okay.
I mean, if you want me to, I can. It's a very long poem, but it's the only long poem that I have in the book. And actually, okay, I'll go to that. I'll go to that in a bit. The last paragraph just says, "As the handsome bot on my Facebook tells me, time is like a pig knife. Good night." That literally was a quote from a Facebook bot that tried to friend me.
Wow.
He posted a picture with a caption saying, "Time is like a pig knife. Good night." It's like what does this mean? I have no idea. But it sort of fits. It's a great, yeah. It was a wonderful bot. It was a very inspirational bot. So there are parts of it that I think that's where the campiness comes from. Okay, so I've answered I've tried to deflect your question by talking about the poetry, but I'll try and talk about the personal. What has changed? I'm several kilograms heavier. That's one.
Not that it matters.
I have consumed a lot more whiskey and food than I ought to. But I think that the fundamental change, I think fundamentally I'm still the same person. I think maybe if I would say that one personal change is I'm less anxious about how my writing will be received.
Why is that? Tell us.
Maybe that's just a natural consequence because the first book was like, okay, yeah, this is my first book. Like, I'm entering the the Singapore lit scene. Oh no, like how are people gonna react to it? And in fact, you feel like it's your first child as well. So maybe as the some of the as the now fathers and mothers will know, you're probably most protective of your first child, because like it's your first child. You're new to everything. You don't know, you have no experience in this. And your first child, I think, is probably reflects all of more of your errors than your second child, hopefully, of your flaws at least of parenting and in some ways of poetry writing. Hopefully the second child is less so. Second child, you'll say, oh well, I've done this all before, like, go forth into the world, young one, and come back in like 14 years or something like that. Yeah. So that's maybe why I feel that way. And I guess I've learned to care less about what people think, because ultimately, like the acclaim you get, or like and prizes and stuff like that, is ephemeral in some ways, and it's highly dependent on who's in charge. So I think that's fine. And yeah, and second, and thirdly, maybe I think because this book took 5 years to come out, and there was so much consideration and pain and effort put into the book, I think I'm much more confident of it than the first book, which in some ways the first book was put together more quickly in some ways, and it was a younger book. So yeah, so maybe that's why.
Nice. So you were part of this group of image symbolists, and I know Hao Guang and Amanda were part of it. The first big poetry group in this country. Now we've got quite a few. What are your thoughts? I asked you this. What thoughts do you have about how the literary community or scene has evolved in the years that's gone by? And do you think it's good, not good? What can be done? What do you think?
I mean, I don't have a lot of profound thoughts on this. I would say the one thing is that it's definitely become a lot more diverse, and I mean that in all sorts of ways, like not just the usual markers of diversity, but in terms of the identity of the poet or the writer, but like the styles have become more diverse. Like there are new styles, and people are not. I think when Singlet started out, it was a bit more of a village, where everyone knows each other, and we're all like quite happy to be pally with each other, and that's still true in some ways. But the village has grown a little bit more. It's a bit more of a mid-sized town, with its own like large church or cathedral, and you don't have to always meet the same people, and maybe there are more circles that exist. And if you offend someone from another circle, maybe you can still survive. Maybe.
Okay.
But the idea is that it's larger and it's more diverse. And in some ways, it's less concerned. I think going to be less concerned if they think about itself as purely as Singlet. It will be pulled as in other directions, right? So you have poetry that identifies itself as eco-feminist poetry, as experimental poetry, as queer poetry. I think that's the way it's going to be. I think it will be increasingly, and not in a bad way, decentered from Singapore. Yeah, okay, that's all I can say. That's as much wisdom as I have on this point. Please don't tell me to predict more things.
It's good. Kheng has just chimed in with the question. So who do you write for? And that twins nicely with the next question, which is, give us some tips from your writing practice. What are the common traps for the working writer, whether just starting out or in mid-career, or an 87-year-old like Prof. Tambu, huh? What wisdom do you have for us in terms of writing practice and habits?
I mean, I can't claim to advise Tambu. I'm sure he has it down by now. So, but I thought about this a bit, and I realized, I mean, like Daryl Lim is here. Poetry writing is so different from fiction writing. And the tips you would give one is so different from another, right? Like if you're a novelist, I would say, please have a schedule. Please try and hit a word target each day, or at least each week. Production is important because you have to finish that novel. You have to have a first draft before we can even talk. if you're gonna write a novel.
Yeah.
So discipline is important. Habits are important. Making sure you take care of yourself and have the time to do it is important. Some of that still applies to poetry, but not all of it. And the key difference is I wouldn't emphasize production if you're a poet, or I would emphasize, because I found it quite unproductive to force myself to write as a poet.
Yeah.
Whenever I've tried to do so, I come up with like not very good stuff. So poetry seems to come when it comes, when the conditions are right. So the part about fiction writers that does apply it is please take care of yourself, I think. So sleep, rest, go on holidays. Look at art, I think. Looking at art, especially visual art, really helps inspire me, and I think resets me mentally to think about another way of being artistic, but not through words.
Yeah.
So not sound, not writing, but the visual.
Nice. And Camlin earlier on, in response to another question, said like a naive painting, deceptively simple on the surface, but a deeper commentary upon reflection. I think she was talking about you in general. Yeah, Daryl. Okay, come quickly. And I want to definitely go into the idea of language and craft. So in several of your poems, you do directly address language. In a poem, Narrative 9, you actually have this line: this poem is behaving as it should because you are reading it. Otherwise, it is usually all over the place. So what is the relationship that your poetry has with the reader? That also addresses the question that Kheng's asking. Who are you writing for, Daryl?
That poem, yeah, I'm glad you picked that poem up.
Page 80.
Yeah, page 80. It's actually inspired by, it's a testament to the magpie way of me viewing things, right? It's about the double slit experiment and the Heisenberg principle.
Oh.
Basically, the idea that things change when you observe them.
Nice.
And they are different when you don't observe them. So when you don't look at the poem, is the poem behaving as it should? Because you can't see it.
Right.
But I think the deeper idea that maybe you're trying to bring out there is about language, right? And my relationship to it. And I think language has to have that function, which you were talking about, that it has to disturb you in some way. I think that's maybe the way I would most concisely put it.
Yeah.
That to me, I want to disturb the reader, to like give them a jolt, like the world is not as it seems. Please wake up. And it's okay. Yeah, this is great because then this allows me to talk about so if you know that the first section is titled the desert of the real, right? And that's actually a quote from Baudrillard, Jean Baudrillard.
Yeah.
He has this concept called the desert of the real. And actually his conception of it was that because of news and all this internet, and at the time he didn't even have social media, but this media world, it seems so much more real than the real world. So when we return to the real, it looks like the desert of the real. So that was part of the conception that we want to jolt people out of that. But I say that because, and this duality between what is real and what is false, because this phrase is quoted in the Matrix. Is the scene in which when Neo and Morpheus are both plugged into the Matrix, and Morpheus finally tries to reveal to him what the real world outside is like. The real world has been destroyed and it's taken over by robots. He says, "Welcome to the desert of the real."
Yeah. Baudrillard actually has a meme of himself with the whole Matrix sort of, the green numbers behind him.
Yes.
Homo that way and so hip that way. In your, but you mentioned this, you have another untitled poem, I think, where you go, "I am a refugee from the desert of the real." Now, who's this I? Is it just another prophetic speaker, or is that Daryl who is a refugee from the desert of the real? Do you think you're outside the Matrix?
No, because the desert of the real is the real world. So we are all refugees from the desert of the real.
So there's no way of being able to distill what's real or true from the simulacra?
No, because we love it. That's the whole point about about social media, right?
Mm.
Let me find the
Which one?
I'm a refugee, page 38, right?
36 or 38. Yeah.
38. Yeah, I'm a refugee. That poem really, in some ways, I mean, sorry to break it down in this very simplistic way, but it's about social media and basically online consumption. But I'm a refugee from desert real because we want to be deceived.
Mm.
So it was that strand of thinking about fake news and falsities that is continued now, right? Because the idea is that we choose to be deceived.
Right. And do you think that that is a saddening thing, a reality that we've got to come to terms with, from a teleological standpoint, or do you think that that we should be ashamed that we almost like the illusion and the deception?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry if I don't want to come across as someone like as the prophet Jeremiah, right? Who is the prophet who is scolding the people and saying you shouldn't do this. Actually, that's not the book. The book is not about that. The book is in this complicated, complicit position. And as anyone knows, I use social media as much or as even more than the average person. But that is that we're all complicit in it and we all love it and hate it in equal measure. And it's kind of that realization that oh, it's so gross, but I love it. In some ways, you're reveling in the so that's where the blurb comes from, where it revels in this transfixing beauty of this last age of men, because it is beautiful. Like this destruction is beautiful in the way that Warhol realized that rubbish could be, or the ordinary could be beautiful. As I was talking to someone early on, and there was this art critic Arthur Danto. He was the first critic to really like appreciate Warhol. He realized to himself that even rubbish that is strewn on the floor could be considered art because of the way conceptual art had developed. And that speaks to the book, that even the ugly is beautiful when we think of art in that way.
Okay.
So it doesn't make us, it's not just to avoid a misimpression. The book is not about condemning anything.
Yeah.
It's just telling us we are in this world and we are complicit, we are part of it, we love it as much as we hate it. And we try to seek a refuge from it, but we fail. And that's just because we're humans.
Yeah. No, thank you. Well said. And the poem Narrative 7 does address this idea of where the truth goes. And in your line, you say, this is page 74, you say, truth floats down the river dozing, and we smother her with roses. So you do think we're complicit in smothering truth out of its presence in the world, terrifyingly as it might be? You think? How do you, as someone who knows history and knows politics and as an Oxbridge scholar and have studied it so well, then understand how truth will prevail? What do you think? What do you think in the world? It's a tough question. I'm putting you on the spot. This was not in our notes. What do you think? How do we tell the truth from the deep fakes and the fake?
We need to get rid of. So the point is we all need falsities to live. That's the whole point. If anyone claims to live completely objectively and without falsehoods or some constructions of life, you cannot wake up in the morning. You can't get out of bed.
Okay.
So the point is falsity is inbuilt, or the desire to believe in the false, or at least some conception of you don't call it the false, call it myths. The desire to I think someone's mic is unmuted. Is that you, Sinsin? Hi, Sinsin.
Yes, it is.
Hi, sorry, I'm muting myself.
Thanks for joining. The idea of wanting to believe in myths. Let's not call it falsehoods.
Yeah.
Myths help us live, right? They might delude us and make us do terrible things, but they inspire us to noble things. So even if you believe, like, say, religions are myths, but then religions inspire you to do wonderful things as well as horrible things. Ultimately, what we call falsehoods are maybe integral to the human condition. I think that's the whole point, that you can't divorce yourself from wanting to live with myths. So I think people who try and say, oh, let's unmask ourselves, let's live in a completely rational, scientific world, are as deluded as people who want to believe in conspiracies. Because there's no such thing. You can't live without myths. Even belief in science or belief in a liberal progress of the world is a myth, clearly.
Okay. Or ideology, or narrative, or story, or poetry, right?
Yeah,
That requires language. Hao Guang has actually chimed in with, actually, in some ways, social media is a shortcut for a certain kind of human interaction, and our love-hate of it maybe reflects the love-hate of networking or awkward dating. Okay, that was about how complicit we are. Okay,
Yes.
I've got one more question, because we're going to go for Q&A in a bit.
Oh, are we? Oh, that's
okay. This is a new one. Okay, I see more than in your first book, so many religious references. I see things like Lord, angels, cloisters, revelation, feast day, catechism, and even a line from cloisters saying, "What is this pain but a premonition of our Lord's angular beauty?" So I know where's all this, and credo, I believe in a God. I believe in I believe in silencing myself before they silence me. So many things, ideas of belief. So where's this coming from? And in terms of its tropic use, how do you see it establishing a kind of textuality for this book that is quite apart from your first book, in terms of its religious referencing? What do you think?
I think it does go back a bit to the idea that, which I'm kind of alluding to a little bit in my last answer, that I don't think myths or religion or beliefs are bad at all. They help us cope, and we need them to make meaning. So there's that famous quote from Marx, right? That religion is the opiate of the masses, right? People always quote the first half of that line. The second half of that line says, religion is the opiate of the masses. It is the heart of a heartless world.
Yep.
So that's kind of the bit that no one quotes. So I have a very interesting view of religion, but I'm not religious at all. And I don't have a religious mindset. But I find myself very sympathetic to believers of all sorts, particularly, Christians, because that's the sort of the tradition that I'm most familiar with. But in general, I find myself quite sympathetic to believers. And my point again goes back to the fact that Christians are not more deluded in some of them are, I'm sorry to say, but like say, the anti-vaxxers, but in general, I don't think Christians are more deluded than many types of atheists in terms of the myths that they believe in. And so that's the position I've sort of ended up with. So I think so that the religious references, I don't think I would say they were intentional. They were quite intentional in the way that I'm talking about it now, but they do point to the fact that religion does give the world that sort of meaning and way to structure the world that I think many of us are lost with in the current world that we live in. And so I think that the idea of religion as a way of structuring the world is in the book. Yeah. And I was talking about this actually on a very side point. I haven't read the book by Sally Rooney, but Amanda was telling me about the book. What's the book called?
Beautiful World, Where Are You?
Yeah. Beautiful World, Where Are You? Which To Hsien Min has reviewed in QLRS. You should everyone should read that review, by the way. But there's a character that I believe in, and Amanda can correct me, who is basically a deeply Catholic character, and all these millennials who are lost in their world, and so full of angst and just don't know what to do, actually find themselves looking towards her and in some ways admiring or envying her situation, because she has such clear sense of what to do, because faith is her beacon. And so the idea of faith as a beacon, I think, I don't believe in it because I'm not a believer, but it's an interesting point to juxtapose alongside the rest of the book. Sorry, that's a very long answer, but oh, sorry, it's him. Yes, okay, yeah. There's a very long answer, but I can yeah, it doesn't really doesn't directly address the point, but I think maybe you can see where I'm coming from.
Amanda Chong says the Catholic is a hymn in the book. But the summary is accurate, Daryl. The summary is accurate. All right. Daryl, do you want to take questions now, or would you like to grace us with your Age of Miracles, the last poem that ends your book? You were mentioning that you might like to read it. It does talk about being sorry and forgiveness and redemption. What do you think?
Yeah, that's because I've only read one, right? So maybe
I know, because I had to trundle on, right? That was actually another one, but that was the poem you didn't really like, so why read it, right? So I didn't read you.
That's not the poem they didn't like, but okay, yeah, that's fine. Let's read Age of Miracles.
Yeah,
that's the last poem, page 90.
Yeah.
Age of Miracles. Terror ate our gut flora, while the post office suspended habeas corpus. I have waited 50 years for running water and aerosol cheese. Before our Lord, I deigned to perspire. The clouds bubbled with chlorine. The angel spoke of bulk discounts. The light shaved 10 pounds off my wrist. I came back to Earth with a new calendar, the months named after nerve agents. Sorry? I tried to reach you with outdated technology. Forgive me.
Yeah. Oh my. Okay. Why did that make it to end the book? Why did you end the book on that poem?
Actually, it comes from this is a massive name drop. I met J.H. Prynne once. So Jeremy Prynne, he was in the same Cambridge college I was at, and he was talking about poetry being outdated technology.
Oh, nice.
And that phrase just has always stuck with me. So again, me and my dumpster diving, right? But he just casually said it to me one day, I think, and then that was always struck me. So in some ways, the poem the end is an apology for the whole book. In some ways, like I tried to reach you with this outdated technology. Please forgive me. Like if this has not touched you in any way, but in some ways it's about the fail. If the poem has failed, if the book has failed, then that's just the way it is. But yeah.
It has not. And in this wonderful reading and launch, you've really helped us understand your project, which is wonderful. Come, let's on that note, thank you for the read, Daryl. We are going to open up this session to everybody, all you good folk out there. If you have a question that you're just dying to ask Daryl about his work or him as a human being, his philosophy of life, just unmute and ask us your question. Anyone? Let's see. Amanda, you're there. I see you there. You read the book and then you gave it a wonderful blurb in its opening pages. Can you share with us a bit about your thoughts of his writing when you first read it and then now hearing him talk about his work? Amanda, what do you think?
Desmond, you did such a good job drawing out all the themes and really like eliciting the best from Daryl that I feel that you're rendering any question that I can ask utterly redundant. But I do actually want to go back to the question I asked in the chat box. An earlier iteration of this book had a lot of letters written to this ancient Chinese poet, right? By G.E. So I wanted to kind of go back to that and like, there's a journey about how that was taken out from the text. But also to ask, you were talking about what the way out was, right? And you kind of said like a poetry that doesn't rest on identity, or what was that? Was that what you said, Daryl, right? And I'm just wondering how you saw that from like a Tang dynasty poet and how you are kind of like emulating that.
Oh yeah. Thanks for bringing it up. That's a long story, man. Bai Chi inspired me because really of his. There's a lot of the story. So Bai Chi is inspiring to me, and I actually made an Instagram post about this, so you can go and look at it if you want the full story. But he was interesting to me as a figure for maybe 2 or 3 reasons. I think one was that he was a Tang dynasty poet. He was a governor of a few provinces and all of that. So it seems very like conservative, typical Tang dynasty poet and scholar. But when you dig deeper, he's actually so much more interesting because he basically got into a lot of trouble because of his like social views. He was trying to use poetry. He was trying to start a new movement of poetry to try and criticize the court. And basically, he thought that by sort of appealing to the masses and by letting people read a poetry, they would be able to echo or direct social criticism of the court. So interesting. So the long and short of this is Bai Chi starts a new school of poetics called the Xing Yue Fu, the New Music Bureau. So I found that cool. Secondly, there's this whole other mad history about how Bai Chi basically is seen as this god of poetry in Japan. And basically he's hailed as this poet god in Japan. And he's basically like the poet in Japan for like centuries and centuries. And it's because of his style, his sparse and like clean, simple, uncomplicated style. You can see echoes of Japanese poetics in there. So the idea of Bai Chi as a figure who then inspires my own poetry and starts off a new tradition is kind of that. That's kind of the figure that I see him as. He's a starter of new things. He inspires a new school of his own poetry, but he also inspires a whole national tradition of poetics. So I see Bai Chi as this figure of who helps me recalibrate my poetics, and indeed that's what his poems did for me as I translated them. Because then when I tried to translate them, I think it clicked something in my mind.
Nice. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Amanda.
Okay. And let's thank you, Amanda. Let's see. Kemlin has been very active on the chat this whole session. Kemlin, what do you think? Do you have a question or an observation about?
Actually,
Daryl? Yeah.
I had a question that I put in there. I mean, as an artist and as a creator myself, oftentimes in the middle of a show, when we're displaying on an exhibition, there's always a bit of a sadness because we want to talk about actually what we're doing right now. And so I was wondering, what is your right now, after the denouement of a project, what are you jumping into, or are you in a period of rest and recuperation, or are you have you jumped into something new? And I want to know what's next as well.
Oh, thanks very much. That's a great question, Kemlin. I am working on several things actually. I'm working on translating something from Chinese to English. That's one thing. Chinese singlet book that I'm translating. I'm working on an anthology of stuff. Keep that under wraps first. But I think it's quite an exciting one. And I have a collaborator of mine is in the audience. Yeah.
Really?
So, yes.
Who?
I mean, that person wants to out themselves.
Is it?
They can do so.
Okay.
but I won't. Yeah. So I'm working on those two things. And
Okay.
Those quite a lot to occupy me. Because I also have a day job.
Yes. Okay. Does anyone else have a pressing question for Daryl? I see a couple of, okay, Hao Guang has had to leave us to be a daddy. Okay, let's, Ian, you were at QLRS with Daryl and Theo yesterday as the editor of a Review, listening to someone talk about poetry collection. Do you have any sense, any thoughts of what you've heard today? Ian.
So why do you put me on the spot like that?
Arrow. It's the new thing now. Let's arrow.
Yeah. As a former teacher, I know how that works. I mean, okay. I mean, I thought it was very interesting what that quote from, I mean, or what you were saying about what J.H. Prince said about poetry being an outdated technology. Because I mean, with the rise of digital, right? I mean, that just seems like a whole different medium in which not just poetry, I guess, but literature in general has been able to flourish, and I think to take off in ways that maybe more traditionalist writers might not. I'm trying to, because I understand where they're coming from, but at the same time, I also think there are a lot of possibilities to embrace in that in the digital and electronic as a medium. So I guess I was wondering, what do you think about the future of literature in general on
Wow.
the internet?
That's a huge question.
Yeah.
This is coming from Ian, who is now in lit arts at NAC, so he wants
Wow,
answers.
yes. Thanks, Desmond, for
Now the whole world knows.
now the whole
That's
knows my
hilarious.
hidden agenda. Yes,
Yeah, I mean
please give me the ideas for the future of the sector.
I mean the whole world of like 16 people. Yes. Yeah, I mean that's a great question. And maybe Ian, I think you might even have better answers than me, since you've been running a review for like 10 years or maybe even longer. But and you will know more. You're basically asking me to comment about like Insta poetry, right? That's what you're asking me to talk about.
Well, I mean, not just Insta poetry, although that's a big part of it.
Yeah.
And something on which I have changed my own mind for the in favor of it, really, actually. I've been quite swayed in recent times of its value as a distinct genre in itself.
Yeah. I think it will have to be like that. I mean, I even see in my own. I mean, if I really reflect upon it, I see it in my own writing. I suspect if you compare the poems, in anything but human to a book of changes, they're on average shorter and more concise. And I do think it is the internet, and the way that things are now have to be much pithier. Clearly, you will not have someone writing like, I don't know, Keats or Shakespeare now, or The Wasteland. Can you imagine writing like The Wasteland now? Exactly. Yeah, to bring forward an even more modern example. So I think that the pressure of compression is because of the internet, and I don't think it's a good or bad thing. I think it's just the way it is. In some ways, it's a good thing actually, because it forces people to actually stick to what poetry is about, which is trying to express more with less. So that's not a bad thing. So that's one answer. The other answer I think is that I think your accommodation to Insta poetry is kind of where I'm going towards as well. I think it's okay in the sense of I think Instagram is a good medium to promote poetry. I'm not sure about Insta poetry itself as a genre. Otherwise, I have a larger question mark. Actually, where is Joshua Eba? He's not here.
He's being a daddy too.
So Joshua has been guilty of saying that, Insta poetry is okay because it's like a good stepping stone or ladder for people to then read a poetry. I think that's largely bunk. I think that's pretty nonsense. Yeah, I think
why
from my experience that none of the readers of serious or more like conventional poetry now, none of them I know started off reading Insta. Like people in Gen Z, like people in their 20s or 18, 19, they did not start off on some ladder that involved reading Insta poetry. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying there's a bad reason to justify it. So that's for you, Joshua.
Who will listen to this when it's on YouTube or Facebook Live. Okay, I also see Shelly Bryan. Shelly, are you with us? You
were gonna arrow the whole room.
No, yeah,
I'm here. I'm here and now I kind of arrowed also, right?
Yes, Shelly, come on, you translate for Penguin China. He just cited a big Tang poet. Never mind that. What do you feel about Daryl's poetry or what you've heard today?
Yeah, so I thought it was good, and I was thinking a little bit about Wei Jie also and his, his move to want to make very complex ideas more accessible. He's famously maybe not all, maybe it's a little bit of not quite true that he wants, if his servants can't read it, then it's not good enough. He's going to revise it, and that I'm not sure that's entirely true,
Yeah, I
but
don't think that's the
that's the
case,
story
but
that we all have, right? So
Yeah.
right, so I was thinking a lot about that, and the things that we've been talking. It's a little bit of a cerebral conversation tonight, and on a lot of levels,
Yeah.
and reaching out to a lot of different places. And just thinking about that accessibility, and then Insta poetry. There's just a lot of things that sort of tie into this, and this concept of trying to make the complex, the big, the deep, tangible for us, and something that we can get a handle on. And I quite like that connection with Daryl and Wei Jie together. I think that's you're a good pairing.
Nice.
I should say on that note that I didn't point this out, that in the middle of revising the manuscript, I decided to go on this whole other direction, and Kheng will know this. This whole other direction of writing letters to Wei Jie. So in one of the versions of the manuscript, there are these like 9 or something letters, maybe 7 to 9 letters of Wei Jie, which are addressed to him.
Yeah.
And because I felt so like I needed to account for why the poems are there. So actually in the original, one of the versions of the manuscript, these letters are in there. But I think I took them out in the end because I think that was Kheng's advice. That was the advice of some other people as well, like Joshua and Hao Guang.
Mm.
But then they made it into a non-fiction piece.
Okay.
Yeah, which is published now in this journal called Exchanges.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I see, thank you for that. Lily, I've seen that
Hi,
you
Lily.
turned on your camera. Is that
Can you ask me a question?
I know.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
please ask.
I'm not like Amanda. I'm not dressed for success. So this is the best I can do at 10 p.m. Daryl, I'm going to speak as a consumer and an audience person. And I'm not a big poetry reader, but I do have your books, and I do pick it up to read, and I find poetry is something that I can't read a whole lot in one go. It's got to be in doses. Now, one of the things and tonight it confirmed to me again how much I like listening to poetry. And so when you read, I like that very much. But I also know that I'm probably not going to pay attention if I just listen only. So I wonder if there was some sort of format that would appeal to people like us, which is that you get a book, but you also get either a recording or you go online to kind of, have this recording, the written word kind of come to life. The times that I have heard poets present their work, like a reading evening or something, I find it very engaging, and I tend to remember it better. But I would remember it really well if there was a visual and an oral audio combination at the same time. So I don't know what that means for the publishing world, but that would be really nice to have.
Yeah, I actually agree with you very much. So I would love that. I would love that. And in some ways, that format is available. If you have an audiobook and you have a book, you have that, right? I mean,
correct.
Kind of. I should
But
hand this over.
See, it would be nice if it's sold together, and not one or the other. So, audiobooks are for the people who either are too lazy to read or are visually impaired.
Right.
It doesn't have to be that way.
I completely agree. And I think lots of poets are experimenting with forms where they have videos. So I know Stephanie Chan and Jen Champion are doing that. And so they're sort of showing the way forward in one way,
Yeah.
like, trying to animate their poems in that way. Not something I've personally explored, but I actually completely agree with you in that. I do think having both actually really helps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so with COVID and everybody being at home and stationary, I've had more time to sit and in my kitchen. And I read somewhere that to get back to reading, everybody should read 40 minutes a day. You know, not read on screen, but really hold a book and read. And I found that quite doable and quite enjoyable as well. So I do want to make a comment on your book and the theme, this thing about living with myths and falsities, and that it's okay and good. You know, I'm very old, so as I kind of age, I started to realize that maybe I got some things really wrong. And you know, I've been calling myself a closet everything. I'm a closet leftist, even though I've always been a capitalist. I really am. Maybe I've been a Christian all my life, but maybe I'm actually a closet Muslim, but then I'm not. So there's so many things going on in my head that it's quite bewildering. So it's all these myths and narratives that I've grown up with, and I think your book. I should get your book because I think it probably lands in a place that I've kind of landed today anyway. In that it's actually okay. I'm actually quite happy and quite cheerful to be to have these myths. They've served me well, and I'm really open for finishing my life on Earth and then find that, hey, everything that I was taught was actually all wrong. You know, whatever it is just not. And I'm kind of intrigued by that now. And so the only positive I can get to is kind of not tolerating, but accepting, you know, all the things that go on around us, and then be open for new things, and then be okay. But I'll tell you one thing, for those of you who still have older relatives in your family and around you. You know, when my mother died, she was 100, but my goodness, that was so liberating when she died. It was, she needed to go because she was very ill. So I was happy for her that her illness and her pain ended. But at the same time, I felt like I just let go of a lot of things. And it took that to happen, for that to happen, to actually, I feel somewhat liberated today. And I think it's because maybe these myths and these falsehoods and all the stuff that's going on, I've kind of think, okay, I recognize you. I've seen this movie before. I've heard that before. It's okay. It's okay. You carry on, because I'm going to carry on. I wonder if that is your ending at the end.
So that's where the question is, Daryl. The takeaway, of falsities and.
Yeah, I mean, thanks very much for the sharing.
Yeah.
I think, Lily, I think you've hit upon it. I think your conclusion is pretty much the same as mine. The book won't tell you that in straightforward terms. It's a poetic treatment of it, but it will land there. In some ways, there is comfort to be had in that the myths may not tell us all the truth, but they are human, and they make us human. And there's something great about that. But I'm not, on the other hand, I'm not saying please embrace all manner of falsehoods or conspiracies. But that's not what this book is.
Yeah, and there's also you know, you accept your own vulnerability. You know, you realize that this stuff is gonna go on. You know, no matter what you think or who you are. You know, okay, so I'm from Taipei, and for those of you who have been to Taipei, you know how terrible the traffic can be, right? And I came back this years ago. I came back from Switzerland to Taipei. Can you imagine the contrast, right? So I was driving and cursing everybody, and my mother was sitting next to me. And of course, it's hot, so the windows are all wound up. So I'm in my car with my mother, and I'm like swearing away and very upset, and this, that, and the other. And she said to me, she said, they can't hear you. So I thought, yeah. So she's right. There's sometimes there are things that kind of go on and you just deal with it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for your thoughts, Lily. On that note, if I was gonna ask, Arrow Hamid, but does anyone want to bring this conversation any further? The idea of living in a world with so much.
I think Hamid is gone, right?
Yeah, he's gone. I think he would have given us some very interesting input on this. I think we've pretty much hit time. So Daryl, it's your space. What do you want to do? Do you have any last wise words for us, or do you want to read us one fabulous poem from your book?
I think another poem. So I was gonna say that actually Fly Forgotten 4 is not my least favorite. Like, it's just one of the poems that I thought could read. But before that, does anyone have any other questions? Or not, I'll just read the poem. And then, I mean, it's 10 p.m. I'm so gratified and humbled that all of you have stayed on to listen to Desmond and I. Thanks so much. If not, I'll read Fly Forgotten 4, which is on page. Let's see. Page 33. Fly Forgotten as a Dream, which is from the hymn, O God, our help in ages past. Fly Forgotten as a Dream. Learning to love is cheap photocopy. New idiolects crystallize like jaggery on my tongue. Sleep, when it comes, is richly marbled and melts on my forehead. The cough caught in my throat flowers like a bulbous alien fruit. My notes say I last spoke my name 8 years ago. The blue fog unbuttons my shirt and leaves me parched by the roadside. I look in the mirror and see a pair of dice for eyes. My hair falls in filthy, bloodied clumps. Learning to love is cheap photocopy. Outside, the hammer joins metal to more unwilling metal. Okay.
Oh my, okay. Yeah, well, it's about love. And thank you for that note on how it's so important for us to stay human in this increasingly complex and intriguing world. And that's very ironic, given your title of the book being Anything But Human. But in the end, the book is about staying human and finding our humanity in the craziness of the world, right? So that's the gift of the book. So everybody, it's been a real privilege and honor to share this space with all of you in this inaugural book launch, the first of many, I hope, for Daryl Lim Wei Jie and his wonderful book. Okay, thank you, and everybody have a good night, and big round of applause for darling Daryl, and huge congrats, Daryl, my good friend, on a yet another.
Thank you, Desmond, for doing this, and thank you everyone for coming.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye, Des. Bye, Daryl.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Nobody wants to leave.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Congratulations, Daryl. And Des, you're a fantastic host. And thanks, Kheng, for publishing this lovely work. When I go home in Singapore this summer, I'm picking up a copy.
Okay. You all wave. It was very nice. It was very good.
Great.
Thanks, Shelley.
Hey, thank you, Daryl. Quick invitation. How about we
Yes.
do a round table on translating poetry? We get Hao Kwang and Susie with us, and we host it. Maybe through my
course.
company, we can do that. Would that be all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's start making plans for that. I think it would be a fun discussion.
Great idea.
Yes, let's do that maybe over emails or WhatsApp. No,
Okay.
you
Sounds
don't
good.
use WhatsApp. Yeah. Yes.
We'll do it by email. I need to get Susie
Email.
involved as well, so
Okay.
we'll get everybody from different places. Okay, sounds great. Thanks.
Thanks for coming, Shirley.
Hey, thank you. Good
Thanks,
night.
Shirley.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night. Good night.
Okay,
Very
Kheng,
nice.
was it
I
okay?
had to stop recording. Let's see. Stop recording.
Are we still?
Yeah.